Can you hear me? Can you hear me like this? Oh, it's on. Perfect. Thanks a lot for joining us today. I am Shereen Talaat from the MenaFem movement, and I will be your moderator for this session. I know it's already 3, everybody is tired, we understand this, but it's a very interesting topic. We are going to speak today about debt and fossil fuel traps. So I promise you an interesting discussion, so don't be bored. Well, so the session will be focused on structures, not symptoms. Debt crisis and fossil fuels dependence reinforce each other. This is not a coincidence. This is how the system operates. Policies are presented as reform. In practice, they restrict choices. Countries are pushed to secure foreign currency. Fossil fuel expansion becomes macroeconomic pathway. And on that, yesterday, Fossil Fuel Treaty, MenaFem, and Oil Change published a report called Spillover Effects, the Fossil Fuel Debt Trap in the Global South, where authors presented 5 case studies of what the debt fossil fuel trap looks like in different countries. Today we have 2 of the authors from Fossil Fuel Treaty here with us in the panel, and 2 other authors from Oil Change and my colleagues at MenaFem joining online, which I will definitely be introducing in a moment. And I also want to welcome Mr. Igor Zuckerdi, Zuckerdi, I pronounce it right. From Mr. Igor is an economist at the IMF Strategy, Policy and Review Department, where he works on key issues related to public sector and debt sustainability across members' country. But before we go into some of the finding of the case study, it's important to note that when we talk about impact that IFIs have on reinforcing this cycle, we should differentiate between project financing, like, for example, the current projects that our colleagues at Big Shift and Power Shift Africa are campaigning against, like where for example, IFC is proposing up to 55 million US dollars in risk participation for Sahara LPG project, and proposed around 46.75 million investment in gas conversion project in Senegal. This project also raised important considerations around energy access, infrastructure, development, and the long-term alignment of such investment with climate and energy transition goals. On the other hand, there is also more macroeconomic analysis of this cycle, where we see that debt that aims to stabilize a country's economy only makes it more dependent on any investment that will help increase the hard currency reserve. The way this panel will be structured, we will at first listen to each panelist and understand the finding of the report, with also the comments from our member, I was going to say member, our guest speaker from the IMF as well. And we'll definitely give some time for your important interventions from the floor. So allow me to start first with Amira. Dr. Amira Soas, the head of policy and research of Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative. Amira is a researcher and an advocacy expert with focus on climate change, climate engagement, resilience building, human rights, women's rights, gender-based violence, and sustaining peace. Wow, ya Amira. And more. Amira, you were the mind behind bringing this report together, as well as the editor and the author of the introduction. What were the most striking findings for you with regards to the cycle of debt coming in the way of just transition away from fossil fuel? Amira, you have 5 minutes.
She knows I talk a lot. I think it's fair to say that I've come round to this space through various avenues looking at the polycrisis, right? Which is why I've covered all of those different areas or tried to learn about them in the work that I've done, and have ended up looking at macroeconomic justice as an absolutely central pillar and barrier, or injustice as a barrier to the transition away from fossil fuels. So this is why one of the reasons why this report came about as an idea amongst us was for someone like me coming into more of the economic side, really realizing what a trap, fossil fuels and debt, or the entrapment related to fossil fuels and debt, is so severe. And so looking at real case studies at the country level with researchers from those countries felt really important to us. But why are we calling this a trap? I think Shereen has mentioned a bit about that. But what we're seeing is a deep entrenchment of overlapping debt injustice and fossil fuel entrapment for both producers of fossil fuels and countries and nations and communities that consume fossil fuels. And that is very obvious now with the escalating crisis propagated by the US and Israeli invasion of Iran and Lebanon. What we're seeing now is the severe vulnerabilities that consumer countries are having in terms of being able to supply energy based on fossil fuels to their industries, consumers, communities. So I think what we have to start doing is really understanding how both fossil fuels and debt are actually extractions from the global south. When you look at some of the data coming out of the World Bank, for example, recently told us that developing countries sent 741 billion more to their external creditors than they received in financing coming in. What we also see is that many countries are paying more in debt servicing than they're getting in climate finance. So the unequal exchange is absolutely crazy. But we're also seeing this in the case of fossil fuels very explicitly, because there's this notion that fossil fuels are going to provide the right to development, to economic resilience, and that's not what we actually see in practice. So when you look at the realities of the implementation of fossil fuel projects in the global south, particularly when they involve large international creditors, it looks very different practically to the kind of dream and imagination that's being sold. Firstly, you don't get the energy security, universal access that is being sold. But also what we see in studies over time, there's a study of 12 African nations in sub-Saharan Africa that found that projects on average took 83% longer than they envisioned that they would, and revenues were 62% less. So there's a difference between the dream of fossil fuels and the practical reality of what's happening. So I think it's important to say that a lot has happened in the 3 to 4 weeks since we finished writing this report, and we're going to update it. But that, I think what we're really trying to do is learn from experience and try to find those specific avenues of entrapment. 2-3 learnings for me, again, someone who's not an economist, but has come into this from a different angle. So looking at one of the case studies, Sri Lanka, written by Anthony, who's not here today. Sri Lanka's had 17 IMF programs. If you track them, that's about one every 2 to 3 years on average, which is fundamentally dictating the country's domestic economic policies. So there's an issue of economic sovereignty, which is coming in here. Sri Lanka has actually really tried to do its bit in terms of the transition, or in terms of focusing on renewable energy with a nationally determined contribution to aim for 70% renewable energy by 2030. But what has happened, it's faced massive loss and damage, it's faced a massive debt crisis, and now it's one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to the US-Israel-led invasion of the Middle East. And so what we're seeing there is this kind of race to the bottom, where Sri Lanka is very constrained in terms of the decisions that it can take. I mean, I think over 100 economists actually wrote to the IMF and the World Bank about the new program, saying that this is not, yes, I'm running out of time, saying this is not a fair or viable approach to debt restructuring. So Sri Lanka is one example. Another example that we looked at is Guyana. Guyana has one of the fastest oil expansions in the world, but it's also a high forest, low deforestation state. So it's got this paradoxical notion of maintaining net zero. And it used to be one of the world's HIPIC countries, highly indebted poor countries. And so it's a very interesting case to look at because it found kind of its oil expansion, or it sort of happened since 2015. So what we've seen is that the debt has come down in some ways. The headline debt indicators have come down, but what has stuck out to me in the data is that new vulnerabilities have actually arisen around revenue volatility and stranded asset risks, because 96% of the deals, of the contracts that they have there, are exposed to what are called ISDS, investor state dispute settlement mechanisms, and they are a fossil fuel industry's dream. The fossil fuel industry uses those more than any other industry, and they wrenched about, I think, in recent years, over 327 billion from nations trying to get away from fossil fuels. So that trap is there in Guyana, and it has the opportunity now to transition away from fossil fuel dependence and focus on economic diversification and resilience, but it needs international support to do so. So I think, just to summarize, there are two, I mean, it's a global imperative, it's a global justice imperative to start addressing this escalating, overlapping poly-crisis, right, with debt and fossil fuels being quite central. And now the International Court of Justice released an advisory opinion on climate justice, saying that states have a legally binding obligation to protect the climate, including by reducing investment into fossil fuels. And so countries in the global south who are being taken on these journeys of big mega projects where they're going to be entrapped to them with the risk of stranded assets in the long term around, for example, oil, coal and gas, can end up in trouble in the long term with exposure of being sued by in the international courts. So there's a governance gap, and I'll speak more about that later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Amira. And I just want to make sure that our colleagues online are already there with us. Perfect. Thanks a lot. And definitely I also want to thank the technical team here in the World Bank. Thank you. And thank you, Amira, for putting us on here on that position, on the governance gap as well. And next I want to go to Ali Nasrallah. Ali Nasrallah, who is a policy consultant and researcher specializing in climate change, fossil fuel transition, and green energy policies. Ali, you wrote a chapter on Jordan, which is where you are from. And you mentioned that IMF programs in Jordan have often emphasizes austerity measures, subsidy removals, privatization of public assets, cost recovery reform, which you argue constrain Jordan's energy choices and reinforce continuous austerity-oriented decisions. At the same time, you say that Jordan takes out loans to help recover from fiscal shocks that come in the form of rising energy prices because of geopolitical developments. So, Ali, what do you think are the biggest factors that hinder Jordan from disgracing its fossil fuel import dependence? And what are examples of some policies that help the government diversify its energy mix? And what is the transition between the potential policies and the IMF structural adjustment program? So, Ali, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Shereen. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I would group the main challenges into three interconnected factors. There's the debt constraints, the contractual lock-in through take-or-pay agreements, and the fiscal dependence on fossil fuel taxation. So to start with the fiscal and debt and fiscal space, Jordan is one of the most indebted countries in the region, with public debt reaching around 116% of GDP. And more importantly, debt service consumes roughly 39% of government revenues. This matters because it leaves very limited fiscal space in the energy transition, whether that is grid infrastructure, utility scale storage, or further renewable expansion. Fossil fuels, despite being volatile and expensive, often become the easier short-term option. But the deeper issue is that in Jordan, energy shocks translate into debt shocks as well. We saw that clearly in 2011 when Egyptian gas was cut to Jordan. The pipeline was sabotaged 27 times during the Arab Spring, which made the gas flows collapse. And Jordan had to switch overnight to imported diesel and heavy fuel oil to generate electricity. This made electricity production costs almost to triple. Over 5 years, the National Electric Power Company, NEPCO, accumulated around $7.7 billion in losses, which were transferred to the government's balance sheet and became part of public debt. It is also important to note that this happened within the broader reform architecture shaped by the IMF and the World Bank programs, including electricity sector unbundling. While this was meant to improve efficiency and bring the private sector to invest in the sector, it separated risk from profit. So private actors remained protected and kept their profit margins, while fuel price risk accumulated for NEPCO and ultimately became a national fiscal burden. As a result, and maybe we can go to the slide, to the first slide with a graph, please. When oil prices rise or energy supply is disrupted, Jordan's import bills spike, and the government borrows to cover this gap. Even when oil prices fall, the debt remains embedded in the sovereign balance sheet and doesn't go down. The second problem is the take-or-pay contracts and fossil fuel lock-in. Jordan experienced one of the fastest renewable energy expansions in the region. After the Egyptian gas crisis, it introduced enabled regulation, and between 2014 and 2021, renewables grew from less than 1% to about 26% of electricity generation. However, between 2021 and 2024, this really slowed down, and the percentage only increased by 1%. New approvals were effectively frozen under claims of grid saturation. While these technical constraints are real and they do exist, a major underlying factor was that Jordan had entered long-term fossil fuel contracts, including the 15 billion USD gas deal with Israel and the Talaat oil shale project. This was domestic production. Despite strong local civil society opposition, including rejection of deepening fossil fuel dependence and concerns over importing gas from Israel while it's violating international law next door, the government proceeded with these agreements. These contracts include the take-or-pay provisions, meaning Jordan must purchase the fixed volume, no matter what happens. This creates a rigid baseload, and it reduces system flexibility. So even when solar is much cheaper, and in Jordan this is the case most of the time, the system is financially obligated to prioritize fossil generation. So the country is not just economically dependent on fossil fuel, but contractually locked into them. So third, and this was a very interesting case study to see in Jordan, there's a fiscal dependence on fossil fuel taxation. So although Jordan is not a producer, there's this dependency on revenues coming from the tax on the consumption. So Jordan generates around 2.8 billion annually USD from fuel taxes. And when combined with another harmful tax, which is for cigarettes, this rises to around 4.2 billion USD. Or about a quarter or a third of the government revenues. This is not marginal, it is central to the fiscal system and creates what I would describe as structural fiscal addiction. The state depends on revenues from consumption that is economically, environmentally, and socially harmful. The country basically depends on imported fossil fuel and then borrows to pay for them, especially during energy shocks. And then this accumulates debt. And then they rely on taxes from fossil fuel consumption to sustain its budget, including paying back these debts. So very quickly, we saw this with a challenge with electric vehicles. What was a success story became a big problem and a big disaster for the government. Jordan became one of the fastest EV adopters globally with the tax waiver program, with EVs reaching about 71% of new car sales in 2024. This is second worldwide. But as fuel consumption declined, tax revenues dropped by an estimate 350 million USD, And the government responded by reversing incentives and increasing taxes on EVs, and actually reducing taxes on internal combustion vehicles. So the IMF programs emphasizes fiscal consolidation, or AKA austerity, cost recovery, and revenue stability. In Jordan, this creates three tensions. The first one is that revenue stability versus decarbonization. If the fiscal system depends on fuel taxes, reducing fossil fuel consumption becomes fiscally destabilizing. Second, austerity versus investment needs. High debt service and fiscal tightening reduce the ability to invest in exactly the infrastructure needed for the transition: grid, storage, and flexibility. And third, market reforms and risk allocation. With past privatization and unbundling reforms shifted risk to public entities like NEPCO while protecting the private investors, increasing exposure to fuel price shocks and contributing to debt accumulation. So to conclude, Jordan's constraints are not technological. We have the world-class solar resources, and we've already demonstrated rapid renewable energy deployment. The real barrier is its energy system, fiscal structure, and debt dynamics that are all aligned around fossil fuel. Unless reform addresses all three together, debt, fiscal dependence, and contractual lock-in, the country will continue to face structural limits in reducing fossil fuel import dependence, regardless of its renewable potential. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Ali. And more structural issues that is problems that is actually, unfortunately, building our future and economies. And allow me here to shift to our online colleagues and speakers. Thank you for being with us despite the different time zones that you are in. Firstly, we have with us Camilo Rodriguez, research analyst at Oil Change International. And Camilo, it is interesting that you wrote your chapter on Colombia and all eyes on Colombia. Now, next week, we are going to have, Colombia is hosting the first conference on the transition away from fossil fuel. So a lot of attention is currently in Colombia to take the lead on this. Add in the fact that Colombia has taken some steps to try to weaken the strong relationship between debt and fossil fuel expansion. You mentioned in the paper 4 policies in your chapter. First, one, ending all new fossil fuel exploration licenses. 2, boosting renewable energy generation to reach 100% of electricity generation by 2030. 3, modifying the legal structure of the Colombian public oil company to generate renewable energy. And 4, advocating for a broader redistribution strategy. So, Camilo, what have been the impacts of these policies, especially about the 4th policy? Because I think it's very important and notable step from Colombia. And how have the IMF and the World Bank recommendations with regards to trade and trade agreements and in both sectors of both debt and fossil fuel production. So, Camilo, the floor is yours, and you have 5 minutes as well.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks everyone for joining this event. Well, the first thing I want to give some context is like nowadays in Colombia, 32% of exports are fossil fuels, are mainly oil and coal. And then we have a dependency in our export revenues on fossil fuels. And the government in 2022 decided that they want to advance towards the just energy transition by not giving new licensing exploration for fossil fuel projects, and to cover the lack of export revenues and fiscal revenues, the government decided to promote the industrialization of the economy. Actually, one of the outcomes of this industrialization strategy is that in 2025, the high value added projects growth by 9% in terms of exports. For instance, one outstanding outcome that I want to share with you, like the chemical production, chemical products, organic products grew, exports of course grew by 36% the last year. And also, like this strategy, for instance, the government create the first factory in Colombia to produce buses for the public transport, and these buses are 100% electric. And with this strategy, the government can advance and replace the fossil fuels revenues and promote the industrialization. But the main barrier of this policy is basically, if you can show the next slide, is the debt. Why? Because nowadays the central government spend around 23% of the public expenditure on debt, paying the debt. It's higher than health, higher than education, higher than any kind of social policy. Then this is the main barrier nowadays to promote the energy transition, to promote the industrialization of the economy. In relation to the IMF World Bank recommendations, well, Colombia is a really great student as following the recommendations of the IMF and the World Bank. Colombia have signed 17 agreements, for instance, of the trade agreements, and one important one that I want to tell you is was signed in 2012 with the United States. The United States is the main commercial partner to Colombia. And there is something really important in Colombia, like as we have a dependency on fossil fuels, and specifically in oil, when the oil price is high, the tendency is that we have a positive commercial trade with the world, which means that we are exporting more than exporting. Why? Because the oil price is high, basically. But after Colombia signed this agreement, free trade agreement in 2012, this trade balance has been negative and negative. Even, for instance, in 2022, when the price of the oil was really, really high, around $100, the trade balance was negative. And why? Well, because a trade agreement is basically that these two countries are competing each other, and well, it's not a surprise that the United States has more advantages over Colombia. Then, as a result of these trade agreements, Colombia had the only way or few ways that Colombia has to boost the exports by boosting the fossil fuels, specifically oil. For instance, the foreign direct investment in Colombia, 39% of this investment for the year 2023 was for fossil fuels. Then we are deepening our dependency on fossil fuels due to these trade agreements. But also, for instance, there is one chapter, there is a outstanding chapter in this trade agreement that says that the Colombian government cannot actively promote the exports of certain products, like product related, like with the first sector, like coffee, banana, flowers, and guess what? Well, we sell a lot of these products to the United States. Possibly, if you are drinking coffee right now, this coffee possibly is from Colombia. The flowers that most of people buy for San Valentine's Day in February are from Colombia. And we cannot boost the exports by, for instance, with subsidies due to the trade agreement. Then, well, as a result, what is the result of these policies that Colombia has followed as a good student is that we have more dependency on fossil fuels. Look, only one final number. At the beginning of the century, 32% of our export were fossil fuels. And according to the government, between 2013 and 2024, 50% of the exports were fossil fuels. Then the main outcome of these recommendations is that we have a dependency on fossil fuels. And well, the answer, one of the things that we need to remove is this debt barrier to promote the energy transition by spending more public money in our kind of products. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. That was very to the point, and also thank you for respecting the time. We also here have my colleague Habiba Fouad online. Habiba is the Climate and Economic Justice Officer at MenaFem, and she's currently pursuing her master's degree in Political Ecology, Degrowth, and Environmental Justice. Habiba, now that we've kind of introduced some of the barriers that debt poses, can you explain some of the impacts on the ground in the case of country, one of the most indebted countries in our region, which is my own country, Egypt, and how population feel this cycle? Habiba, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shereen, and thanks everyone for being here. So it's important to realize that this debt fossil fuel cycle we're talking about today is not just an economic phenomena. Its impacts are felt in people's lives every day through IMF-driven austerity policies and the way that debt pushes the country deeper into fossil fuel dependence. Uh, as you said, Egypt is one of the countries most indebted to the IMF and has entered multiple loan programs that total over $20 billion only since 2016. And while the IMF loans make up only a portion of Egypt's total external debt, around 10%, um, their impact goes far beyond that because of the conditions attached to the loans and because the act of lending out sends a signal that the economy is stable and on the right track when this is far from the truth. And Egyptian citizens and people in Egypt know that the most. And these programs have imposed austerity measures, as I mentioned, currency devaluation, subsidy cuts, privatization, uh, and higher interest rates, and that prioritize debt repayment and investor confidence over public welfare. And also have led to massive inflation levels that increased poverty and inequality to levels never seen before. And the scale of this is very visible in the budget because more than 60% of government spending is going towards debt service. So on the ground, people experience this as a rapid erosion of public services and living standards. Healthcare and education remain severely underfunded, going below Egypt's constitutional commitments of spending 6% of GDP for education and 3% for healthcare. And while the IMF programs in Egypt require a social protection floor, supposedly designed to shield vulnerable groups from this fiscal tightening, these measures are often inadequate compared to the impact of these conditions like the devaluation and austerity. And the IMF also extracts resources more directly through mechanisms like surcharges. In Egypt's case, these additional fees have significantly increased borrowing costs. And in 2021 alone, they made up over half of the country's payments to the IMF. These are resources that could otherwise be going to subsidies, food systems, or energy access and transition. So the second key dynamic is how this debt pressure feeds directly into a fossil fuel trap. And because Egypt faces constant foreign currency shortages, it's pushed to rely on fossil fuels and especially gas, not just as an energy strategy, but also as a financial one. So fossil fuels become a way to generate hard currency and try to stabilize the exchange rate and reassure creditors by increasing foreign currency reserves. So instead of transitioning away from fossil fuels, Egypt is expanding oil and gas exploration, signing long-term import agreements, and orienting its energy system towards external markets rather than a local and resilient economy that can actually improve people's livelihoods. So this creates a self-reinforcing cycle where debt creates the need for foreign currency and fossil fuel exploration and production are used to meet that need. And then that dependence then justifies further borrowing and further fossil fuel expansion. And additionally, a large share of the profits from fossil fuel production is captured by foreign companies. And while the Egyptian government retains very limited revenue due to the investment laws that favor foreign companies as a way to attract more hard currency, and these investment laws are recommended by the IMF and its conditionalities. And at the same time, this reliance on fossil fuels actually hasn't improved Egypt's energy security. And since 2014, and even before that, fuel prices have increased nearly fivefold, and electricity tariffs for some groups more than 300%, and also in a very regressive way. So that has increased poverty, and with estimates suggesting that poverty has reached 50%. But the Egyptian government has stopped publishing statistics on poverty since 2022. So which was at around 34%. That was the last statistic. So public services have deteriorated, and many households are struggling with this rising cost of living.
You have 1 minute, ya Habiba. You are my colleague.
How many
I'll give
minutes?
you 2.
Okay, I only need one. So what people are experiencing is a system where they are paying more for energy, for food, for basic services, while having less access to those same services. And this is also about sovereignty, because when a country is locked into debt and dependent on external financing, it has very limited space to make independent decisions. Energy policy, fiscal policy, and even land use become shaped by the needs of to secure foreign currency and satisfy external creditors rather than the domestic needs. So again, just to wrap up, the cycle is not just economic; it's very social and political. It shows up as austerity, rising inequality, and a growing sense that key decisions about the country's resources and future are no longer made in the interest of its people. And that's why breaking the cycle is not just about reducing debt levels, but transforming the system that ties these two things, debt and dependence, together in the first place, and restoring the ability to invest in a just and people-centered just energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Habiba. It's a cycle. It's a very vicious cycle, and thanks, Yani, for bringing us to the reality of our people. That is not. They are not statistics. They are living real crisis implication, and so on that, I want to turn to back to the room and introduce again Igor Zakardi, who, as I mentioned, an economist in the IMF Strategy, Policy and Review Department, and has contributed to technical assessment of the IMF debt sustainability framework and developing tools to capture the impact of natural disasters and climate-related shocks on public debt indicators. It's a very tough job, Igor. But from the IMF perspective, how do you reconcile the current approaches to debt sustainability and macroeconomics stability with the need for just energy transition, particularly in countries with very vulnerable economies? Not only vulnerable economies, but different multi-crises, war at the beginning of the discussion, climate and global warming, debt and vulnerable economy. People are really suffering. So from your perspective, where debt servicing and structural adjustment appear to be limiting fiscal space and reinforcing fossil fuel dependency. The floor is yours, Igor. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to this CSO meeting. It's a very interesting topic. In my department, in SPR, the Strategy, Policy and Review, particularly in debt policy division, we are in charge of conducting analysis and provide the tools for the IMF to analyze the debt sustainability across countries. I cannot talk about the specific countries because I'm not a chief of mission of the countries, but I can give you more or less what is the perspective of the IMF in terms of the of how we see debt sustainability, how we analyze the debt sustainability. The IMF mandate is to safeguard macroeconomic and financial stability as a prerequisite for sustained growth and job creation. That we, as an institution, have highlighted several times the need for countries to address public debt challenges. In particular, for a priority for the emerging markets and low-income countries to create the fiscal space for the support critical growth, enhancing spending and alleviate debt service pressures. To support this mandate, debt sustainability analysis is a key tool for the fund's work, particularly because it promoting macroeconomic and financial stability entails avoiding public debt stress and maintaining the debt sustainability. To assess that debt sustainability, the IMF employs two different frameworks. One is for market access countries, and the other is for low-income countries that rely mostly on IMF and World Bank concessional lending or financing. Debt sustainability analysis aims at determining the borrowing paths that can be maintained without experiencing debt services difficulties or requiring exceptional financing. The analysis is informed by debt burden indicators, that is, indicators that are constructed using stock of debt and debt service indicators in comparison with repayment capacity indicators like GDP, or in the case of the leaks, exports and fiscal revenues. The final risk rating combines information both from these indicators that create mechanical risk signals and a structured application of judgment to reflect the country-specific factors of that. We continuously revising and sharpening these tools to ensure that remain fit for purpose. We regularly review the framework and ensure that capture the relevant developments in the debt space as well as in emerging risk as emerging risk. For example, currently the IMF is conducting the latest leak DSA review that was launched in 2024. That was guided with regular engagement with the IMF and World Bank boards, and benefited for extensive engagement with civil society organizations and academics. And we are in an advanced stage of this process, and we are planning to conduct a general public outreach of the framework. What can I say about the new framework? We heard some of the feedback from CSOs, from academics, from other international institutions, and we include several important elements, new elements on this new framework. First of all, we are including optional new long-term module that captured or allowed country teams to assess impact on public debt vulnerabilities of policies and investment decisions associated with development and long-term challenges, including the challenges of climate adaptation. Second, we are better contextualize countries that are rated as high risk in the current DSA to understand better what is the time and the type of risk that they are facing. Third, we are working on an additional tools to incentivize the coverage, quality, and transparency of the data. This is a work that the World Bank and the IMF are doing together. And also, we are improving the quality and the indicators for capturing domestic debt vulnerabilities. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Igor, and I believe everybody may have a lot of question at that moment. So I will, for the next 5 minutes, I will open the floor for reflections and questions from the room. So please feel free to lie in here and take the mic. Please go ahead. Please make your intervention to the point and short for the sake of the time.
Hello, my name is Rohan. I am from Way Zero, an environmental organization here in the United States. So my question is about the recent report. So the report has identified the ISDS mechanisms as a major tool for, sorry, I have my note on my phone here, for a lot of fossil fuel companies to punish the countries that are attempting to start to move away and start to electrify with more sustainable alternatives. And so I believe they're expecting quite a few $100 billion from nations taking those steps. So my question is, given that that mechanism requires some sort of buy-in from the global north, how is it, like, how realistic is it to block that transition, especially because there is a lot of contradiction with that?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Any other question from the room? Okay, let's go with that, and maybe Amira, if you want to answer the question.
Thanks. So this is an issue with the broader investment governance regime, which is also deeply unequal. And this is one marker or one mechanism that's being, used as a tool to effectively stop the transition happening. And this is, I think, a lot of the questions are about, can you change the regime, or what can we make work within the existing regime? And I think that's an example of how our mindsets and imaginations have been captured to make us think that the structures that we're currently in are sufficient and appropriate for the world that we live in. And what we're seeing with the escalating polycrisis in every single lens is that the current structures, especially in terms of economics, are not in the interests of a fair, prosperous, just future and transition. So there is quite a lot of work being done at the moment to interrogate exit strategies, not just from ISDS mechanisms, but actual investment regimes, trade and investment regimes. And so that's something that's high on the agenda of the Santa Marta conference. I know President Petro in Colombia has taken the steer from thousands of experts to actually put this on the agenda, and Colombia has basically said that they're now going to exit from these agreements in future. So what we need is more guidance to governments about the steps that they can actually take. So one of the things we're doing at the Fossil Fuel Treaty and with many other civil society organizations and academics is starting to develop guidance for governments, like what options do they have when it comes to investment governance in future? What steps can they take in their sovereign economic interests to ensure that the investment agreements that they make are fair? And that will require global governance to shift. So we do need a global governance mechanism for a just transition, which doesn't currently exist. And so that's something that we're ideating collectively, and there are different ideas about how to do that. One, of course, is the Fossil Fuel Treaty, and happy to talk to you more about that later. Thanks.
Thanks, Amira. Global governance mechanism for just transition. And as we can see, debt is becoming the most I cannot say problem. It's because it's more deep than problem in our life, and given the fact that we and our people are suffering, the planet is already suffering. So, and we understand that transitioning away from fossil fuel is a must, but we understand that our people need to be able, or at least to come out from the surviving mood to life mood. That need to this crisis need to come to an end. And on this, I want to go to the recommendation part of this discussion. We've talked a bit about what that fossil fuel trap looks like, and we now want to dive deeper into the recommendation of the paper. So for the upcoming 30 minutes, and then we're going to have another round of intervention from the room, I will start in reverse. So over to you again, Igor. The report shows that debt pressures are actively driving fossil fuel expansion in many global South countries. How does the IMF account? How does IMF account for this dynamic and its framework and program design? And what concrete steps can the IMF take in the near term to help countries break this cycle through debt relief and cancellation, ending austerity-based conditionalities, or support renewable transition as a macro-critical approach? So, Igor, the floor is yours. 3 minutes this time, Igor.
Great, thank you. No, of course, every country has its own energy infrastructure, and we expect that country teams capture those elements behind the macroeconomic statistics that are used for different analysis, for the analysis of the sustainability, for the analysis of the external sector, and all the types of analysis that the IMF surveillance and programs does. In terms of what are the tools that the IMF has to support countries? Well, for countries that are facing debt challenges, the funds lending toolkit is well positioned to to support vulnerable countries seeking financial assistance. The IMF lending or arrangement can support macroeconomic stabilization and structural reforms essential to rebuilding resilience. Also, with the World Bank, the IMF continued to promote the three-pillar approach for reform, investment, and growth, and support countries committed to a strong reform to create a space for growth and build resilience, with the view of helping catalyze enhanced financial support and from official and private creditors. In addition, for countries that are in debt restructuring, the fund continue actively supporting those member countries, including the G20 common framework and the global sovereign debt roundtable. We have been discussing mechanisms to accelerate restructuring processes, to make it more transparent to both to the public and debtor countries and creditor countries, to share that data information, and to become more available to the stakeholders.
Thanks, Igor, for sharing some information. And I mean, like, I don't want to push the discussion, but I also feel that the IMF can do more in terms of identifying crisis. Like, for example, the war in Ukraine. When the war in Ukraine happened, there was a lot of intentions and efforts to do some debt restructuring, to suspend some surcharge, and given the fact that, for example, the Swana region are now facing a crisis. Actually, it is facing an ecological crisis for years. And I'm Egyptian. I live in Morocco. Morocco, coming out from an earthquake to floods in Libya, ecological collapse everywhere, and then the war now. Country like Lebanon, it's more than infrastructure that Lebanon's need now, and country like my country, Egypt, was the whole cycle of the debt trap that it's not ending, and people are forced to live under a curfew, a fake curfew, that not to consume energy. So, I from your perspective, is there any attempt from the IMF to respond to this crisis on a way that addressing their debt problems?
Thank you for the question. First of all, take into account that most of the IMF arrangements are thought to stabilize and to improve the condition for a long-term growth. For instance, in the case of long-term challenges, the IMF since 2022 create the resilience and sustainable facility that provides affordable longer-term financing to support low-income countries and vulnerable middle countries that undertake critical reforms and have problems, structural problems in their balance of payments or in their fiscal accounts based on structural problems like, for instance, climate change or pandemic cases. The purpose of that for that type of arrangement is supporting policy reforms that are allowed reduce macroeconomic balances and risk, and augment the policy space and fiscal buffers to mitigate these longer structural challenges. This is a good arrangement in terms that it's a long term. It's a 20-year maturity arrangement with 10 and a half year grace period. And affordable fees, and also currently 30 countries emerging and low-income countries are participating in this kind of arrangement. We have different countries from Costa Rica to recently Liberia, Pakistan, or Burkina Faso. This kind of arrangement allowed to design for countries to design the institutional arrangement needed for catalyzing financing to long-term risk, to tackle long-term risk, particularly government arrangements or regulations that could bring private and public resources to long-term to tackle long-term challenges.
Thank you, Igor. Well, we need more public finance. And I also want to go to my colleague Habiba. Habiba, what do you think the most important step that IFIs, like the World Bank and IMF, should take at this moment? 3 minutes, Habiba. I mean it, Allah.
Thank you, Shereen. I will kind of speak more to what you already mentioned, which I think that the most important step that if the IMF is interested in improving countries' macroeconomic stability, then a big part of it is debt cancellation and restructuring and suspension, and that's a prerequisite for improving any economy and for supporting countries' journey to improving everyday living conditions, which includes a just transition to renewable energy. And there is a lot of research that proves that the IMF loans and conditions have actually been not beneficial in stabilizing the economy, but rather the opposite. And we've seen many other civil society organizations present this in the last few days, present like this research, and also for many years. And so as long as this extractive debt cycle exists and reinforces this expansion in fossil fuels, it's very difficult to talk about a meaningful or just energy transition. And it should be reframed as a structural correction to the global financial architecture and not just a discretionary relief. And also, while moving towards the full cancellation of debt, as I said, debt restructuring should be happening quickly and should be aligned with the just transition, including shifting away from the conditionalities. And more generally, like IFIs that directly give project financing for fossil fuels need to stop reproducing this cycle. And this means ending all forms of support, direct and indirect, for this fossil fuel expansion, including de-risking private fossil investments. And finally, there also needs to be an effort to correct the imbalance in the global financial system, which makes a lot of the time renewable energy more expensive than fossil fuels. And without addressing these high borrowing costs, currency risks, and access to highly concessional financing, countries will continue to be pushed towards fossil fuels simply because they appear more financially viable, even if it's not the case. But yeah, fundamentally, none of these steps will be sufficient without addressing the debt issue first. Thank you.
Thank you, Habiba. And I just heard that we lost the audio on the stream, the English audio. So if please any colleagues from the World Bank technical support help on that. So Camilo, over to you.
Thank you. No, what I want to say first is that I did an investigation like 10 years ago almost about the debt sustainability in Colombia. I did a model. This model is that the IMF and World Bank use. And using this model, I said, if Colombia is continue following the recommendation of the IMF and World Bank, we are going to have more issues with the debt. 10 years ago, the debt to GDP ratio in Colombia was 50%, and nowadays it's 60%. And Colombia have followed all of the recommendations in the last 10 years, all of them. I feel, I don't know, there is a problem with these policies and recommendations because they are definitely not working. And I think the situation is worse. In 2008, the debt to GDP was around 32%. Nowadays, it's almost the double, 60%. Then, as I said in my first part of the presentation, Colombia is a really good student following the recommendation of the IMF and World Bank. And they're not working. I mean, you can see in the statistics, they're not working. Then the first thing is that I strongly believe that the IMF and World Bank, we should have a broad conversation about the policies because it's not only in Colombia. There are more countries that are following all of these recommendations, and we are in a debt trap in the global south. The second thing I want to say, and I'm really clear, as I said before, 23% of the public expenditure in Colombia is to pay debt. And if you see, 20 years ago, the IMF canceled the debt of many countries. 50 years ago, after the Second World War, Germany, some countries canceled the external debt of Germany, and Germany used this money to rebuild the country. And recently, another example of Germany modified the fiscal rule, and they can spend more money in defense. It seems that you can cancel the debt. That's the first thing. It's not a big issue. The IMF already did 20 years ago. The debt of Germany was canceled 15, 16 years ago after the Second World War. It's not a problem. It's a matter of will. And we need more money. You know, there is money. The White House was thinking to us 200 billion to the Congress to spend more money on war, to kill people. Yeah, there are money. Of course there is money. The problem is that we are spending money we know. The global north countries are spending money to kill people around the world. Of course, if we move this money to the just energy transition, it would be really amazing. Then I think that the main thing is that, as I said before, debt cancellation is a really important proposal. It is possible. It's a matter of will. Secondly, I strongly believe that we need to have a broad conversation about all of the IMF and World Bank policies because definitely are not working. And finally, there are different proposals that from the Global South we have tried to promote. For instance, the Borrowers Platform. That is a platform where different countries are trying to create agreements towards these kind of policies. Yeah, that's my answer. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Camilo and Ali. Over to you.
Thank you. Talking about the same one.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I think Camilo and Habiba covered a lot. So maybe on more of a national level, if we think about that, I think, as Habiba mentioned, cancellation, ethically, it's the right thing. Lots of these debt are not ethical. They were taken within corruption and for projects for fossil fuel that the people and the constituencies now do not agree with. But when these cancellations are not possible, maybe debt for climate swaps can be another solution as long as they're safeguarded and additionality is guaranteed. And I think also on the national level, we need to make sure that the IFIs, the MDBs, do not support any more fossil fuel projects. This will bring stranded assets. This is not helpful for any of the countries. So that is very important on the national level as well. Habiba also talked about the cost of capital, and I think I just want to go into more details about that. So the cost of capital makes such a huge difference. So for example, in the African continent, the cost average for interest rates for renewable energy projects is around 15%. In the global north, it's 4 to 7%. This means that over the life cycle of the project, the cost could double, at least double. So this is really important, and the IFIs and the MDBs have a big role to contribute here through guaranteeing these loans and de-risking the projects. So this could be also by concessional finance or long-term lending guarantees and hedging instruments for currencies. Also, another thing that is really important here is the transparency and governance in lending. So this is really important. We see that lots of the lending eventually goes nowhere and doesn't help these countries. The more transparent these deals and these loans are, the better it is and the more accountability we can have. And finally, I would like to talk about fiscal and social space for transformation. So, for example, in Jordan's case, Jordan is paying around 40% for debt servicing, and then it's collecting around 40% from fossil fuel consumption. So this is a cycle that the country cannot break from. So we need the IFIs, the MDBs, to look at that and bring loans and money that could solve this problem structurally. And thank you.
Thank you, Ali. But allow me to step over my role as moderator, because it's also a matter, a very important matter of principle that. Although for example, the outcomes of the Sevilla Compromiso and the effort that the World Bank made with a different kind of governments was debt for natural swaps, for example, but we consider this as a false solution. It's another an instrument for extractivism, and it is not solving the debt problem. It is creating another level of the problem. So my recommendation is debt cancellation and not debt for climate or debt for natural swaps. And I know that the room already has a lot to say on that, but grants versus loan, especially in crisis times, we have surcharge suspensions or another rechanneling of SDRs, but that's another discussion. I want to go to you, Amira, on that.
Okay. So, look, I think we do have quite extensive recommendations in the report that were collectively developed, and we've got them on one page. So if anyone is interested, please do look at them, because they're also building on, years, if not decades of work from civil society, academics and other experts on these topics. But I think for me, that I really want to just talk about the governance gap. In order to dismantle carbon lock-in and debt at source, we need to actually recognize collectively that the escalating debt in the global south is actually an injustice. And, you know, we're often kind of siloed into like the crazy civil society people, right? We're seen as the kind of radical, oh, they're so radical. But I actually think if we look at the facts about debt, you know, Africa's debt burden has doubled in the last 5 years, you know, alongside the deeply unjust capital cost premium that the continent faces. It's just really unfair. And we need to acknowledge that within the technical institutions as well, because this is a political issue. It's not just a technical issue where we talk about numbers. This is about structural inequality. So why do we keep thinking that doing the same things is going to lead to a different outcome? Like, the poly crisis is just getting worse, and it might just be that many of the people kind of making decisions are not living with the consequences of that. So we have to name the problem and be honest with ourselves, and that's where the recommendation around debt cancellation is so critical. You know, IFIs and MDBs are part of a system of enforcement. That doesn't mean that individuals who work for the IFIs and MDBs are bad people, but it's part of a system, and so we need to start naming the problem and addressing it. We need to stop funding fossil fuels, and we need to start properly funding both renewable energy and economic diversification, because currently it's almost impossible for lots of countries across the global south to actually make the energy transition because there's no support structure. Like, the injustices are escalating in different areas and different silos, and there's no plan. There should be a binding multilateral mechanism on debt to ensure that we can actually start to address it at a structural level. And we also need a global plan to phase out, phase down fossil fuels and phase in economic diversification. And that plan has to be based on equitable timelines, right? So where those who created the crisis that we're in, who don't need fossil fuels right now, should stop now. And those who need fossil fuels for a period of time have time to phase out alongside the financial and technical support. There is no plan, even though the International Court of Justice has told us that we should not continue in the direction that we're going. So we need a plan, we need to address that gap, and we need that plan to be binding and just and managed, because we're already in the transition. It's happening inequitably and unfairly. We need to be in a transition where the rich don't get richer and the poor don't get poorer and the poly crisis escalates, because we're just going to end up having the same conversation a year from now with more extreme figures and more extreme problems. So yeah, like, I personally will argue that a fossil fuel treaty can help us, and a UN mechanism on debt, on cancelling debt, will be able to help us. And I hope that some of you in this room who sit in those technical spaces can come with us on this journey of advocating for the structural change that we need. Thanks.
Thank you, Amira. And we still have time to open the floor for intervention from the room or question. If anybody, please speak up now. Please use the microphone there.
Hello, I'm Thierry from Accountable Africa. I just had a question. Maybe you could draw on your expertise. Which country or development model has developed without fossil fuels or minimal fossil fuels? Because as we're kind of advocating to these countries to look at, phasing out, we need to show them a model that has worked. Do you have any from your case studies? It might not be a whole country. It could be an industry. It could be, what can we point to that has developed, without fossil fuels or minimal fossil fuels?
Thank you. Any other intervention or question from the floor? Okay. Who from the panelists who want to, or even our colleagues online, if you want to answer Teresa's question? Amira?
Sorry. I think we've got examples of countries that have taken really great steps to develop their renewable energy infrastructure. But unfortunately, because of the poly crisis and because we're in this structural crisis, they're getting setbacks. So Zambia is a great example, right? I think 83% of Zambia's energy relied on hydropower was renewable, but because of the most devastating drought that the country had ever had, followed by the most devastating flood, this knocked out their ability to rely on that infrastructure. And this is also why we have to be very focused on diversification of the renewable energy supply as well. We can't rely on one system. We have to ensure that there's access that's spread across countries so that communities are resilient. It's not just mega projects, because we also have lots of problems with mega projects. So there are many examples, actually, if you look at it, of countries that have, Sri Lanka's another example. Like Sri Lanka managed to 100% electrify based on hydropower as well. But again, climate injustice, escalating polycrisis and debt has led to the situation where they can't manage it on their own. And so I think the question is, if you start looking at, Europe is a good example. There are many countries in Europe that are, have invested with much fairer terms in their renewable energy systems and have quite significant renewable energy systems. They're just hanging on to fossil fuels because they can. And they're hanging on to fossil fuels because a lot of the companies that benefit the most from fossil fuel production are globally north headquartered in France, UK, North America. So they're making huge profits. And this idea that we need fossil fuels in countries in Europe is honestly insane. Like, the idea that we really need them is not borne out by the evidence. It's, again, the lobby's capturing of the imagination. So I think the focus should be on the countries that can move away from fossil fuels now, and we know that they should be doing it. And then, renewable energy technologies are getting cheaper, they're getting more accessible, the technologies are developing. So what we see consistently from the IEA, International Energy Agency's analysis, IRENA's analysis, and so on, is that actually renewable energy is becoming so much more accessible, just not for big parts of the global south because of the financial system rules.
Thank you, Amira, and let me emphasize on that. Yes, it is obvious who need to phase out now from fossil fuels and who need to build their own economies, like our countries in Africa. Please.
Hi, my name is Teresa. I'm a grad student from SIS at American University. Thank you so much for hosting this discussion today. In light of the exacerbated conflict in the Middle East, there has been a major uptick in the use of coal, reliance on coal in a lot of Southeast Asian countries. And I was wondering, with that example in mind, how can you try to support those countries during shocks caused by upticks in violence and conflict?
Thank you, please. Here's the card.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alizé with the Bretton Woods Project. My question is for you, Igor. I'm just wondering, given that the IMF is currently undergoing a review of its surveillance and its conditionality, I'm just wondering what your views are on countries being able to have the policy and fiscal space to implement industrial policy. I think rather than imposing austerity and fiscal consolidation, which is not allowing countries to invest in renewable energy and a just transition. And I think there's a shift right now. We're seeing this at the World Bank with the release of their new industrial policy paper, and on a global level also, like the huge advances that China has made on renewable energy, given the use of industrial policy and state-led approaches. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this at the IMF. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Elise. And I guess actually both questions are for you, Igor. How we can stand with Middle East countries in this shock, and answering to Elise's question on the surveillance and conditionality review. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Regarding the review of conditionality, well, thank you for the question. The review is ongoing, and thank you for several CSOs to participate in the process. The main purpose of the review is to find the elements necessary to help countries to stabilize and have better conditions for long-term growth. In that way, we are checking all the benefits and all the effectiveness of the programs that we are having and the surveillance that we are having, in order to understand what could be a good or what can be effective policies and which one cannot be effective. I'm not involved in that review, so I cannot give you details on that. But this is more or less the purpose of the project, and soon the IMF is going to produce the results of that review. Regarding the shock in the Middle East, yes, we until before this shock, we have seen, in fact, an improvement in general in the financial conditions and debt indicators of particularly low-income countries. We have seen, in general, for instance, that comparison to the past, and in particular after the COVID and the Ukraine shocks, low-income countries have been improved in their solvency indicators. But in terms of liquidity indicators, there are still issues. So the IMF and the World Bank have been working on helping countries to participate in different ways to improve the profile of their debt, in order to have more fiscal space for investing in development. Now, with the leak review, we are producing quantitative tools that allow country authorities and teams to discuss this kind of issues.
Can you just give us like 2 words about what is the leak review, just for the crowd to understand?
The leak review is since 2024. We started a comprehensive review of the whole DSA framework for low-income countries, and as I explained at the beginning of my intervention, the process is well advanced. Thank you for the continuous engagement in the last 2 years with CSOs. We have, as I explained, we included different new elements that are not in the current leaked DSA or leaked DSF framework. For instance, one is we are including a long-term module that captures the cost and benefits of investing in development and long-term challenges like climate change. That element was already in the DSA framework for market access countries. We have improved it. We have with the latest technology in the IMF and the World Bank, with the discussion with several CSOs. And with participation of several CSOs on the topic, and we generated a very interesting exercise on that. Second, we are improving the quality. We are creating incentives for countries to improve the quality and the transparency of that data. First of all, with different information about flagging information of gaps that we can find in order to see what are the main issues. And third, we are including a specific analysis of domestic debt that is important in frontier economies. That is the leak countries that are closer to more access countries. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Igor, and we are about to close our discussion. Oh, we have another question. Go ahead, please.
One more question. I'm Sophia Smonteroy. I'm a reporter with Health Policy Watch. I wanted to ask a question about kind of the public pressuring from the Trump administration that the World Bank and IMF have been focusing too much on climate. So that's one question. The other question is, maybe Amira, you can answer this, if this more recent pressuring, if the debt issue is a larger issue than just this public pressure.
Well, allow me to start to wrap up. So I will hopefully ask my panelists to answer your question while they are doing their closing remarks. And in 30 seconds, I'll start with Amira. Closing remarks.
I mean, it may be sensitive to say this while I'm sat here, but, the IMF and World Bank are there to serve the world, not only one country of the world. And so, ultimately, the mandates should not be subject to political pressure. And we're not just talking about climate injustice, we're talking about economic injustice. And so, we need to continue working on that regardless of, individual leaders trying to put pressure, which is not effectively a democratic approach.
Ali, 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. So IFIs can support the transition, and we need them. They're part of the equation, and they have the tools to help the energy transition. I think very quickly, just reflecting on some of the questions, I think there are models. For example, Jordan grew from 1% to 26% of renewable energy within almost 10 years. And this created around 35,000 jobs in a country where unemployment is around 20%, and within youth 46%. So this was a model, but overall fossil fuel have been here forever, and renewable energy other than hydro became just feasible and economically feasible in the last 15 years. So there are models, and we need them. And maybe just very quickly on the Middle East question, I think what countries have to do is to build their resilience through domestic renewable energy projects, and this cannot happen day and night. You need the money, you need the IFIs to help, you need the countries to invest, you need to get out of this trap, and this is why we focused on this vicious circle. And thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Habiba?
Yes, just to add on to what Ali mentioned, it's also important to note that a part of the definition of a just transition is that the responsibility falls more on the global north to transition faster than low-income and middle-income countries. And so the global north and the IFIs, which are led by global north countries, need to provide first have to transition first and need to provide the resources for other countries to grant-based resources to also support this transition. So it's also important to note that some countries could take longer because of their position, but historically the responsibility falls more on the global north, since a lot of the impacts of climate change have the sources is from these countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Habiba. Camilo?
Thank you. Well, no, my final remarks. Well, first, thanks everyone for being here. I only want to say that, as I said before, Germany modified their fiscal rule and they can spend more money in defense. It seems that the IMF and other people say, yeah, it's okay, you can spend more money in defense, but you cannot spend money in other things. Then it's a matter of will. Final example, Colombia spent around 3% of GDP in military expenses, and the IMF never recommends to cut the expenses. They recommend to cut the expenses on social policy. Then I feel that it's a matter of will. As I said before, the United States has money, global north countries have money, and instead of spending money in subsidizing fossil fuels and wars, that they should spend money on the people.
Thank you, Camilo. Igor?
Well, thank you very much. This is a very interesting meeting. I really appreciate your feedbacks and your comments. This is something that the IMF and the World Bank, I talked with for the IMF, that we really appreciate, because your feedback and your comment give us the ideas and elements to continue improving our tools and our elements and our work with countries. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for the panelists. Thanks a lot for the audience. And you can find the report on our website, Fossil Fuel Treaty, MenaFem Movement, and Oil Change. You will find them also soon in Arabic and Spanish. All I want to say that this is structural crisis need to end. It's turning to a structural violence, death and fossil fuel trap. And my final word from a citizen of the Swana region, from a citizen from the most impacted region and continent, I say here, this war needs to end now. Thank you.